You are a member of the hero's party, but are distrusted because of your profession. You and the party win, but they suddenly find themselves paralyzed. They call out your betrayal, but the hero begs you not to do this. You calmly explain that a self-sacrifice was always needed in the end. With his own sword plunged into his chest, King Devon crumpled to his ruined throne as the hero group, tired and bloodied, stood triumphant. Devon's dark reign is no more, Simon breathed, looking around at the 5 people who had been strangers just 2 weeks ago. Thanks to everyone in this room. Though the others cheered, one among them didn't share their excitement. Kale, the team soulbinder. He glanced through the crumbling roof, where the last of the sunlight slipped behind thickening clouds. Though dawn had broken, the sky was growing darker by the second. His time was running out. Not noticing the encroaching darkness, Elaine, the sorceress, turned toward the group and was ready to launch into another of her long speeches about how fate had guided their hands. But the words never came. Her mouth froze open, eyes wide with terror. The light drained from the sky, leaving the throne room bathed in the creeping shadows of night. The group tried to move, but an unseen force gripped them all where they stood. Yari the barbarian, his muscles straining against invisible bonds, shouted as he spotted Kale approaching them. You did this to us. Rolf, already gripping his short blade, tried to bring his arm into action, but it refused to obey. I told you guys that soulbinders were bad news. He's going to rip our souls out. Kale's eyes, blazing with fury, locked onto Kale's. After everything we've been through, you pull this trick? Have you no shame? But Simon, watching Kale with a more careful gaze, saw something the others didn't. There was no anger or betrayal in Kale's expression. Only sorrow. Please, Simon pleaded, his voice softening. We can help you. Don't do this. Kale paused for a moment, meeting Simon's eyes with regret. He wanted to explain, to tell them all the truth. But there wasn't time. The pull of the dark magic that bound him was growing stronger, begging to be used. The distant rumble of thunder echoed through the crumbling walls as Kale approached Devon's fallen sword. It was almost here. A sacrifice must be made, Kale said quietly, running his hand over the hilt. He could still feel Devon's presence within it, but it was fading, slipping away like the last traces of daylight. He took a deep breath. For what it's worth. You helped me find my soul again. But some battles. His grip tightened on the sword. Must be fought alone. He turned to face them one last time, his smile soft but regretful. I wish I could stay and enjoy the peace we fought for. But my time is already gone. As night swallowed the last light, the rumble ceased, signaling the beginning of the end. Reaching the balcony, the starless sky bathed the land in darkness as silence filled the air. Suddenly, the rumble began anew and Kale looked above to see a white vortex of light, growing bigger with each passing moment. The storm. The Book of the Damned Souls didn't mention much about the storm, only that it was fated to swallow every soul in its wake. The soulbinders didn't fear the storm, seeing it as a natural conclusion to life with the realms left barren. However, the book did mention a way to ward off the storm. A soul for a soul. The ultimate sacrifice. Kale thought about his friends. Maybe, if defeating the Dark King wasn't their focus, they could have stood united against this threat. But they were woefully unprepared and already spent. This was the only. From the spinning spiral, a river of light descended unto Devon's kingdom, illuminating the dark with its glow. Feeling his own dark magic, Kale glanced at Devon's sword. I will need your dark magic before you can rest, Dark King, Kale muttered. Kale lifted the sword, the runes along its blade flaring to life as dark tendrils of energy began to coil around his arm. Devon's power, though fading, was still strong enough for what he needed to do. Falling from the sky, the storm spilled onto the streets below as panic and screams filled the air. People crumbled to the ground as their souls left their bodies to become one with the storm. The sight should have been beautiful to the soulbinder. Life was meeting its end and entering oblivion. It was everything the elders had preached. Raising Devon's sword toward the descending light, Kale readied himself. The river of energy from the storm responded, twisting and spiraling out from the streets as it reached toward the battered castle for the blade. Kale closed his eyes, letting the dark magic flow through him. Pain shot through his body as the light swirled into the sword in him. It was unbearable, but Kale gritted his teeth and held firm. This was his purpose, his final act. The ground beneath him began to tremble as the magic reached its peak. His body cracked and glowed with a light, flickering between darkness and the blinding glow of the storm. Then, with a final burst of power, Kale pushed all of his magic into Devon's sword. The blade rattled before it spat the storm out from it. A shockwave erupted from the blade, sending ripples of light and dark across the land. The storm hissed and howled as the souls it had once consumed fell back toward the earth, returning to their bodies once more. Quickly losing its form as day slowly returned, the storm retreated into the spiral. Kale stood on the edge of the cracked balcony, his body flickering like a dying flame. His breath was shallow, his strength almost gone, and his soul was all but burnt. He turned one last time to face his friends. I'm sorry, he whispered. But this was the only way. And then, as the last light of the storm disappeared into the void, Kale's body disintegrated into ash, scattered into the twilight by the wind. The paralysis lifted, and the group rushed forward, but it was too late. Kale was gone. Only King Devon's burnt sword remained. By the fates, Elaine whispered, dropping to her knees as morning returned to the lands once more. Why didn't he tell us? Kaelsta asked, trying to hold back tears. She couldn't believe they had just accused their friend of betrayal just moments ago. Rolf nodded in agreement, sheathing his trusty short blade. Yeah, Elaine could have helped him and we could have evacuated the kingdom. Simon shook his head, staring at the spot where Kael once stood. The Soulbinder had always been arm's length from the group. Come on, everyone, Simon finally said. We have to see if the people need help.